All right, so for today, I think what we're going to cover, I know Lori covered this a little bit last week, but as you all are probably aware, there's been some changes to FHA mortgage insurance, and it's creating an opportunity for some reports that you can send out to various people that may have been looking at FHA and decided on conventional before, maybe they haven't closed yet, or it could be to new prospects, first-time home buyers that are a little bit scared of FHA because everybody's heard the stigma about how MI lasts for the life of the loan, but they don't realize that MI has been reduced. So for today's discussion, I'm going to show you how to build a rent versus own, and it's going to be comparing against three different programs. One is going to be FHA from last month using last month's factors. The other one is going to be that same loan using this month's factors to show the savings. And then the third one is going to show what the increased buying power is as a result of these lower MI factors. So before we begin here, I want to make sure everybody's aware of how to ask questions during this session. There should be a GoToMeeting toolbar in the top right corner of your screen. If it's already collapsed, there will be a little orange arrow, and that orange arrow will open up the panel for you. And if you have a question, you want to type those into the questions area in the GoToMeeting toolbar. Actually, Diane has a question already. She says, is today's session going to review Edge Live? Absolutely, we can do that. As soon as we finish preparing this rent versus own, we'll go ahead and cover how to use Edge Live to drive that presentation for your borrower. Great question, Diane. Thank you. All right, so let's get into this. So I'm going to start this from scratch so you guys can see how this is prepared just from the beginning. And you'll see that there's not a whole lot you need to do with this, especially since this is going to be a marketing presentation that I'm going to send out to lots and lots of people. If you are going to send these out to specific individuals, of course, you'd want to leave it as an individual report so that you have that borrower's name and address on the report. However, if you're going to use this for something to post to maybe Facebook, or if you're going to post it on your website, or maybe you're just going to use it as a blanket link that you can send out to a bunch of your prospects, you want to make this a marketing report. Now, the effect of making something a marketing report in Edge is that it removes the borrower first name and last name and instead replaces it with a report headline. So that report headline will appear at the top of your presentation. It's also going to remove the property address. So when we get to the property section in the wizard, there's no need to even complete that. It won't show up. So I'll show you which fields are absolutely required to make this happen and which fields you can actually bypass. So for this one, I think what I'm going to call this one is buy more house with FHA. Oops. And then I am going to select this person as a renter because we want to prepare a rent versus own report. And then for partner email, if you've got a specific realtor that you're working with and you want to make sure that your realtor can be notified when these prospects actually click on the link, you would need to enter your partner's email here. So for instance, if I had a specific, like say, Amy Realtor, I've been working with her. She's given me a few leads, and I want to make sure that I'm going to send to those people. And when those people consume the report, that Amy's going to be notified, I would want to put in her address here. Now, what this does is when you put in that address and you get to the very last screen in Edge, there's a checkbox where you can select to be notified when somebody actually views the report, but then there's going to be a second checkbox there that's going to ask you if you want to notify your partner when the report's viewed. So you'll see that once we get to the end here. Now, friendly name, since this is a marketing report, it's already kind of got a friendly name. It's called Buy More House with FHA, so I can probably leave this empty, but I might want to indicate what group of people I'm sending this out to. So maybe this is a Facebook post. And I might even put a date there. So what is it today? It is the 29th, so let's do 1/29/15. Now, my next step here is to determine the goal on this one. This is going to be a purchase, so I'm just going to select Get My First Home. And then it's going to ask me for rent. Now, I've already created this presentation, so I already know what my monthly payments are going to be. And generally, you want your rent to be just about what your monthly payments are going to be over on the home ownership side. Your rent might be a little bit less than the home ownership side, but generally, you want to keep them kind of close. So I'm going to put in $2,200. And an annual increase of 3%. Now, just so you know what that annual rent increase is Edge is actually going to increase the rent every year by 3%. And it's going to keep going until the presentation ends. So it kind of depends on the metrics you choose for how long your analysis points are here, but that rent will grow over time. Now, the reason we have this in here is unless you're in rent control, your rent does increase every month if you're a renter. And it may or may not be 3%. It may be less. It may be more. I know that when I used to rent, I was getting upwards of 5 to 7% increases every year. So kind of just depends on what area they're in. 3% I think is a very safe bet to use, because I would also use 3% for the home appreciation on their new homes. So kind of like to do an apples to apples thing there. Now, if they did have monthly renter's insurance, you could put that in there. That's pretty cheap. And then any other monthly rental expense you could put in there as well. Now, when we get to standard deduction, because this is a marketing presentation, I'm not going to put a standard deduction in there because I really don't know what each specific borrower's tax bracket is going to be. So I'm actually going to leave tax benefit completely out of this equation. So I'll leave standard deduction empty. And then as far as the gross income, non-mortgage debt, we're sending this to a bunch of people, so we don't need to get detailed on this one. I would say that for your savings balance, I would put this in there and just indicate that there's at least enough to cover the cash to close on these particular presentations. And since I'm going to be doing $300,000 loans, FHAs, I know they're going to need about $20,000 to close. So I'm going to put in 20 grand. And I will say that they're getting 0.5% for their interest rate there. Now, because I'm not showing tax benefit, I'm going to leave the tax bracket field blank. So that's the trigger. If you put in a tax bracket, you're going to see tax benefit on your presentations, whether it's rent versus own or a total cost analysis. I'll go ahead and leave that blank. And then as we go forward, these are data collection points that obviously you would only use if you were actually asking the questions of your borrower. For marketing presentation, you can go ahead and leave these blank. Now we get into the products that we're going to show. So for the first one, this is going to be FHA last month. Now, if you do have FHA templates already set up for your product templates, you can certainly use one of those. I'm going to do it from scratch for you here today, just to make sure that you guys can see how this is done. But I'll do my $300,000 purchase price, and then my down payment of 3.5%. Now, just a quick tip here. If you're one of those people who likes to use keystrokes to navigate the wizard, which I'm one of those guys, you see my mouse doesn't move a whole heck of a lot when I'm doing these. I use the tab function to tab around between different fields, and you can actually do shift tab to tab backwards. So just a quick little trick there for those of you who love the keyboard. For instance, one way this really helps is when you tab to that down payment field and you want to jump over to using a percentage instead, you can actually hit tab again, and you can see that it highlights this percentage button. And if you hit the space bar on your keyboard, it's like pressing that button. Then you hit tab again, and you're now in the new field. So no mouse movement. I've now navigated to the correct field. I can put in my 3.5%. Then I'm going to pop in the interest rate that's necessary. I like using the same interest rate across the board. I know FHA interest rates have gone down a little bit, so you certainly could use a little bit higher interest rate for last month than you would for this month. Perfectly acceptable. Matter of fact, let's do that for today. Let's go 4.25, and then I'll use 4% on my new FHA loans. Now, the final thing I need to do on this screen is I need to make sure and check, yes, this is an FHA program. Now, what that does is when I get to my next screen, it's going to ask me for the upfront MIP amount. If I don't have this radio button toggled, it won't even ask me for it. So keep that in mind. Anytime you're doing an FHA loan, you got to make sure this radio button is toggled to yes. Now, this also holds true for VA loans, USDA loans, or single premium MI buyouts. So anytime you need to have an upfront premium that is kind of outside of the base loan amount, you want to use this FHA toggle. Now, this is going to be changing soon. In our dev environment, we're actually going to give you a new indicator that asks you what type of premium is it. So you'll see that there'll be another drop-down box that's going to appear right here, and you'll be able to select whether it's upfront MIP, a funding fee, a guarantee fee, or a single premium. Now, no need to go back and make changes to your old presentations. We've made it smart so that if you have FHA checked as yes here, it's automatically going to choose the upfront premium for you. So no need to make any changes there. I should also note that this change is really only going to be for the labels inside Edge. When it comes to the output presentation of Edge, it's a single field for everything. So it'll be labeled upfront MIP / funding fee / guarantee fee / single premium, and they'll be abbreviated with a legend below them. But that's coming soon in our next release over on the dev side. All right, so next I need to make sure and input my closing costs. Now I can do these by pulling down a template, or I can do them by itemization. Now, I would encourage all of you to make sure you've got at least a couple of templates in here for the closing costs. It makes life a lot easier, and you don't have to be spot on with these. Generally, when you're creating your first templates, you want to go and get a fee worksheet that you've recently closed, so something that has very realistic figures on it for this type of loan. And you want to go item by item and just start adding fees until you've got everything you need in there. So for instance, I want to get my appraisal fee in there. I want to get my credit fee. I'm going to have, owner's title, lender's title, all that kind of good stuff. But you can see where I'm going with this. You're going to fill out the line items according to what's on your fee worksheet. Now, when you're done filling these in and you've got the dollar amounts in there, or the percentages if you prefer to use those, there's going to be a lot of your title fees will probably be good ones to use percentages on. But sometimes you may have to calculate those out to kind of figure out what they are. I know that several different title companies use different types of ratios for these, and sometimes there's multiple factors that can determine, like, what the price of the house is. If it's above a certain amount, it's going to be a certain ratio. Excuse me. So there's a lot of different things that can come into play there. So for something like owner's title, if you don't have a static percentage that you can use across the board, I usually recommend you leave it blank in your templates so that you can come back in and fill it in on a case-by-case basis. Now for today's, I'm actually going to pull down a template here. So let's do my 30-year FHA. And you can see, because I've got that template saved, it's already got all my dollar amounts in there. The only thing I might want to update is my loan origination fee. If it's not a static amount, if it's a percentage, I'm going to go ahead and put that in there. And you can see that actually did increase it just a tad. I've got my notary fee, owner's and lender's title. And again, these are estimates here, especially on a marketing report. These don't have to be spot on. You just basically want to get a ballpark figure of what the fees are going to be. And, it's more about telling the borrower what the fees are than how much the fees are. Everything's going to change at close to some degree. There's going to be little nuances in the title fees. There's going to be additional fees that might only be disclosed on your GFE that goes out. So don't worry too much. Don't get bogged down in the minutia on this. You just want to have some decent fees here that are going to represent what you want to do. Now I'm going to delete my hazard insurance and tax reserves. And the reason I'm going to do that is I'm going to allow Edge to populate those based on my actual monthly taxes and insurance. And I'll show you how to do that when we get to our next screen here. But when you've got everything the way you want it and you want to save this as a template, go to Save as Template. And you can call this one, say, 30-year FHA, 3.5%. And I might even say new, so I know that this is the new guidelines. Then hit OK. And that fee template will be available from there on out for you. Now, I know there's a lot more fees than what I'm showing here, so I'm just trying to give you an idea of how this would look. You're probably going to have 7 or 8 more fees than what you're seeing here. Now, once you're done adding in your fees, you're going to hit Apply to Loan. And you can see that once you do that, it actually grays out these fields up here. So these fields are basically a summary of what's inside your closing cost detail. So if you need to edit any of these figures here, you can go back into the detail and edit the specific line items, and it will edit these figures for you. Now I'm going to make sure I'm putting my prepaid interest days, and then I've got to account for my upfront MIP. Now upfront MIP has not changed. It's still 1.75, and you can still finance it in. So I'm going to do the 1.75 here, and then check the box to finance that figure into my loan amount. Finally, let's get to the monthly costs. I like using percentages here. They tend to work out the best. And I know these are percentages kind of based on California. The property tax is going to vary from state to state. So whatever state you are originating in, you probably want to try and figure out what that ratio is. And you can do it pretty easily in your loan origination software because those are based on percentages as well. So if you were to match up a fee worksheet from a previous loan and then just basically run that in Edge to try and see what that percentage is going to be, you can keep toggling this percentage until you get the right dollar amount, and then you know what percentage to use going forward. Now, finally, I need to count for mortgage insurance. Now, mortgage insurance, this is the part where everything is changing. But remember, this is FHA last month, so I'm going to use FHA guidelines from last month. I should clarify that. That's for loans with case numbers that were assigned before the 26th of this month. Now, FHA, when they put out their HUD letter, and actually let me get that to you real quick in the chat. Okay, I just sent everybody a link through the chat in your GoToMeeting toolbar, so I'll hold on just for a second so you guys can click on that, open it up in a separate screen. But this is the mortgagee letter that came out indicating that our MI guidelines are changing. And it tells you also that if you do have a case number that was assigned before the 26th of this month, they're providing a cancellation policy for that case number so it can be reassigned. So check this HUD letter out. It's very important. You want to make sure that you're aware of how the guidelines are changing and what they're changing to. And you notice that we don't often show jumbo loans here when we're doing our trainings, but if you refer to that HUD letter, you'll see that it does show the amounts for the plus 625.5 loans, and those have actually decreased as well. So, for instance, greater than 625 and less than or equal to 95% loan to value, it used to be 1.5 for the MI factor. It's now down to 1. So that's a pretty significant drop for jumbo loans, and that could be very useful for you. So for this one, I'm using last month's MI guidelines. So I'm going to do 1.35. And then very critical for any government loan you do in Edge, and you cannot forget this step because it's going to make your APR skyrocket if you don't do this. You've got to check this box, Calc MI on balance. This is only government loans. So this is FHA, USDA, VA. Those, and I should say VA doesn't have mortgage insurance, so it's FHA and USDA. These have to have this declining balance calculation. What this does is this recalculates your mortgage insurance, the monthly mortgage insurance payment, every year based on the last 12 months outstanding balance. So it's an average of the balances for 12 months. What this means is that every year my mortgage insurance is going to go down incrementally. And when I get to the end of this loan, it's going to be something like $20. So most people don't realize that this happens on FHA loans. And it's a great point for you to be able to educate your borrower on how FHA loans work. Not only are the MI guidelines dropping, but with this information about how MI works, you now have two factors where you can battle that stigma that FHA has. The objection of, oh my God, I got to carry my mortgage insurance for the life of the loan, and I wouldn't have to do that on conventional, right? Well, you wouldn't, but conventional is actually going to have a higher MI factor now. So conventional did drop a little bit too, and they released the 3% down program, but it's now actually very comparable. So while somebody may qualify for the FHA, they may not qualify for that conventional. So just keep that in mind, kind of back of your head when people are talking about mortgage insurance, because it's a very scary concept for a lot of people. It doesn't have to be as scary. Knowing that it declines over time and knowing that the guidelines have forced it down a little bit, it's a lot more competitive with what conventional loans do. Now, the last step to this is because it has to run for the life of the loan, we want to make sure that our MI cutoff month, and you can think of this as a minimum number of months the MI must run before the MI cutoff percentage can be observed. Our MI cutoff month has to be the same as our term. So this one's going to run for 360 months, which means the MI cutoff percentage is actually never going to get observed. It's strictly going to go off this cutoff month because by the time it gets there, the loan's done. Now, remember I told you I was going to have Edge populate my reserves for me. Now, the way I'm going to do this is these fields down at the bottom here. As long as you've got hazard insurance and taxes up here, you can tell Edge multiples of those reserves to collect. So, for instance, I want to collect 3 months of hazard insurance reserves, and I want to collect 2 months of tax reserves, and then I want to collect a year premium for my hazard insurance reserves. Now, when I toggle these, when I enter figures here, what it's going to do is it's going to map these back into my closing cost details. So let me show you what that looks like. And you can see that it's happened because now my prepaid escrows are showing 1937. But if we look into the closing cost details, we can see that there's new line items down at the bottom. Remember, I deleted these earlier. So these got piped in by making those selections in that screen we were just in. It automatically calculated them for me. I don't have to worry about it. It automatically checked the prepaid escrow box. So these are good to go. All right, so we've finished our first product. Now we're going to do our second product. So I'll do add another product. Now, so that I don't have to do all that legwork again, I'm going to use my copy button. So I'm going to hit copy from, and I'm going to copy that scenario I just created. And you can see it brought in everything exactly the way it was. I'm going to call this one FHA Now. And then I'm going to reduce that rate to 4. And because I use that copy function, everything is already in here for me. All the way down to my loan origination has adjusted because that 1% is based on the loan amount. You can see that it's obviously going to be the same for this one, but my hazard insurance reserves, you can see what those are. They've already been piped in. I don't have any worries about this. Now the next step here is because I use the copy function, my hazard insurance and property taxes came over, but so did my mortgage insurance. And I'm going to need to modify this because mortgage insurance now isn't 1.35. This is going to be 0.85. That's a pretty significant reduction in mortgage insurance. Now I can leave all these other figures exactly the same, and then I'm going to add one more product. And I want to draw your attention to the right side of the screen now. Now you can see here we've got FHA last month, $21.72 is our payment. FHA now, it's $170 almost of a reduction just because of the mortgage insurance drop. So that's pretty significant. So what does this mean for our borrowers right now? This means that if they couldn't afford this $21.72 last month, we want to show them what they can afford now using that same payment and the new MI guidelines. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the FHA Now, but I'm going to call this one Buy More House. And I'll use the copy button. I'm going to copy FHA Now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually keep toggling this purchase price until I see that this $21.72 is equal to my new pity payment here. Now I've already done the math for this, so I won't bore you with too much of the detail here, but $315 is going to be a little bit low and I'm going to have to adjust up. I'm going to show you the process you would go through, however. You can see that $315 gives me a payment of $21.10. So I need to get it close to $21.72. So if I go back in here and I'm going to choose a different purchase price, let's say $318, and hit the right arrow, you can see that it's now recalculated. I'm at $21.30. So pretty close. I can get a little closer to $21.72 here. Let's try $319. And I can actually go up to $320. Good. All right, so I'll do that. And that's a nice round figure. It's going to make it very easy to talk about this to the client. All right, there we go. So I don't have to do anything with the fees. Don't need to mess with those at all. Because I copied the FHA Now product, my MI factor is correct, so I don't need to do anything with that. And I'm actually even saving them $30 to give them $20,000 more house. So this is really your main selling point here is, look, last month when we talked about FHA, we talked about what you could afford, and we were looking at a $300,000 house because this pity payment was in your price range. Now with FHA Now, for that same house, it actually cost you significantly less. But if you want to do the same thing as you were doing before, that's slightly less than what you were willing to pay before, I can get you $20,000 more house now. So as we go through this, now this is a rent versus own. So this is going to be a little bit different than what you would see on the total cost analysis, but I'm going to show you both. Now remember, I'm not showing tax benefit at all in this equation, so I'm going to leave my radio button here checked at rent versus principal paid. And then for my long term, I think I'm going to show total interest in MI paid. And when you hover over these, you can see exactly what those figures are. And going with FHA last month, you can see our interest in MI paid. This is $214,000. For the same price house, it's now $185,000. And this is for a 15-year period of time. To buy a $20,000 more property, you're actually only paying $197 versus your $214. So $15,000 in interest savings to buy a greater house. This is almost like a move-up buyer presentation, but for a first-time buyer that just didn't pull the trigger last time. Now you can also show total net worth. This is a very telling graphic. The reason I might recommend this one is, remember in the beginning when we were in the affordability section, we put in that they have $20,000 in the bank. Now if they continue to rent, that $20,000 is going to continue to grow at that 0.5% rate of return that I entered. And at year 15, they've got $21,500 in the bank. Now, compared to any of the purchase options, these ones are always going to do much better. And the reason is the net worth for this is a function of how much equity you have at this 15-year period of time, plus how much do you have left in the bank after close. Now, to really show you how this works, I'm going to go into the adjust reinvestment strategy. Now, this brings up a grid where you can assign extra principal payments, you can assign extra payments to their current savings account, or extra payments to a new investment vehicle where you choose the rate of return. Now, this is great for working with CPAs and financial planners, and I'm not going to go too in depth on this because really it's geared more as a marketing report, so I don't want to confuse anybody here. So the reason I'm showing you this, however, is I wanted to show you why I chose $20,000 for my savings balance. In this middle section here, you can see it starts with $20,000. Now, my cash to close for FHA last month would have been $17,400. That leaves my borrower with $2,500 in the bank, and that's going to continue to grow at 0.5%. At the 15-year period of time, they have $2,723 in the bank. Now, it doesn't seem like a lot here, but it's what's left of their savings. So when we're comparing it to the rent, it's going to be this savings here, what's left, plus their equity at that point, which is why we're getting these huge, huge figures over here on the net worth. They've gained a lot of equity over the 15-year period of time. Now you can see with varying levels of closing costs, and well, actually they all have the same closing costs, but with varying levels of down payment and price ranges, we've got slightly different saving starts that are coming up right here. But either way, these are kind of inconsequential because your equity is going to be so great in the home ownership side. So my next step here, I can skip this entirely. This page is not going to matter at all to me because I'm doing a marketing presentation, so I'm just going to buzz right through that. And I'm going to get to the final screen. Now, when you get to your presentation screen, this is asking you what type of presentation you'd like to produce. Now, if you do want to produce a total cost analysis instead of a rent versus own, you can certainly do that. All you would do is select total cost, and then as you continue through these screens, you can select the metrics that you're using. There's our monthly payments, there's our short term, and then when we get to our long term, if we want to, we can actually choose whatever we like right here. Now, there's some confusion on rent versus own, and I want to try and dispel it for you. When you are first in the client screen and you choose rent here, Edge will try to guide you through that rent versus own product all the way through. Now, that includes the analysis screen. You can see it says rent analysis summary. So if I go through these screens and I end up producing a total cost analysis at the end, this screen is not going to adjust my figures on the total cost analysis. This will only adjust for the rent versus own. Meaning, if I were to choose, say, total interest in MI instead of net worth, my total cost isn't going to change at all. My total cost can only be changed if you're doing a rent versus own report by selecting total cost up here and then continuing through these screens. These are the same screens as what we were looking at in the analysis summary, but these are for the total cost. So just keep that in mind. There's a lot of confusion around this because people think that they can generate a total cost here, go back to the analysis screen and change a metric, and it'll change their total cost. It will not do that. All right, so we're not going to do a total cost for this one. We're going to do a rent versus own, but I just wanted to make that point for you. So just in case you ever go in and you're trying to change the analysis points and it doesn't seem to be changing them on your presentation, check and see. If you've started this as a rent versus own and you've produced a total cost, that's the reason. Your analysis points will only affect the rent versus own when you choose rent. All right, so we've selected rent versus own, and we have the option of showing whichever products we'd like to here, and I'm going to show all three of them. Payment notes, these actually become pretty important. I would say they're probably most important on the rent versus own. And I'll show you why in just a second here when we get to our actual analysis. But the rent versus own does a little bit different calculation when it's coming up with net monthly payments. Total cost shows total pity payments against each other, but the rent versus own shows net monthly payments against each other. So I would probably want to indicate something here in the payment notes so it's not confusing. And actually, let me show you the output presentation first. Try and make this a little bigger for everybody. Okay, so as we're looking at this, you can see our total payments are right here, and these are pity payments. And when we're looking at what these graphs represent on the right, these are obviously different from what our pity payments are across the board. And the reason is we're showing the renter what their net monthly payment is. So the net monthly payment, if we were to look at, say, FHA last month, we start with our pity payment of $21.72. Then we subtract out the principal they're paying every month. They're retaining this in the form of equity, so we're not looking at this as a cost. Rather, they're just building equity with it. So what's left between that? Interest and mortgage insurance. So our net monthly payment here is always going to be the pity payment minus the principal paid. If you do show tax benefit, it will also subtract the tax benefit out of that to give you a final net payment. Now, the reason I point this out is because when you're having this conversation with your borrower, they're going to be looking over here at the net payments, but you need to know how to explain what that is. And you also need to know how to draw their attention up here to the total payment, because this is literally the cash that comes out of pocket. However, the bottom one is what their net cost is for that payment. All right, so let's get back over into Edge real quick. And we'll go back to that first screen. And because of what I just explained, I think it would probably be a good idea if I put additional payment notes here. I might even put something like taxes and insurance are estimates. Net payments shown are pity minus principal paid. Something like that, just so it makes sense and it's near the payment. It also helps for compliance. Anytime you've got something that might be a little bit confusing for somebody, for a borrower, you want to make sure and put as much explanation as you can around it, and certainly address it when you do your video for this presentation, because it'll be very important for the borrower to really understand what you're trying to get across. So as I continue forward in this wizard, it's going to give me the option of modifying the sidebar text that comes along with each one of these variables here. And these are the 4 different quadrants in Edge. And you can see I've got some default verbiage in here, which is pretty good. If you want to use it, feel free to. Matter of fact, let me put that into the chat for you just in case you want to copy that. And then the next section here, this goes to the short-term period, and we can decide what we want to show, whether it's rent versus principal paid, rent versus tax benefit, or a tax benefit analysis. Obviously, we're not using tax benefit on this presentation, so I'm just going to show rent versus versus principal paid. And 60 is the default variable, but certainly if you want to change this, you can. If you want to push it out to 10 years or something like that, feel free to adjust this. Now the next screen is your long-term section, and I like putting total net worth here or total interest in MI paid. Total principal paid doesn't really do much for me. I know they're going to pay $500,000 in rent, and the principal they'll pay on the home ownership side. This is positive. They're retaining this in the form of equity, but I think I'd rather show them net worth so you can see this is what you've got left on the rent side if you don't purchase a house. This is what your net worth is going to be if you do purchase a house at the 15-year point. Now, finally, we need to select a delivery option. So I always recommend email link. It's got so many more features than a print job or a PDF would. In fact, the tracking is all tied to the email link, the ability to open on a mobile device, the ability to do Edge Live, which we're going to be covering shortly here. All these are functions of using the email link. And if you don't use an email link, obviously, you print something out or you send a PDF, what if you have to make a dynamic update? You have to update a rate. You got a closing cost that's changed. Now you've got to resend this analysis and hope the person opens it again. With the email link, you make the adjustment on the fly. So while you're on the phone with them, you make that adjustment on the fly. As soon as you hit either one of these right or left arrows, it's automatically going to adjust on their presentation. So you don't need to resend the link. That first one you send, it works for this presentation for the entire way. No matter what you do to the products, no matter what you change in the different variables, that link is always going to update what's reflected inside Edge. Now, if I do want Edge alerts to go to my partner, this is that checkbox I was telling you before. This one only appears if you put your partner email address back in that client section in the beginning. And then finally, because you're talking about rates, you got to put a quote date on here. The last thing you need is for somebody to come back next month with this presentation and say, hey, you quoted me 4%, and you're looking at your rate sheets and it's saying you're at 4.5 now. You certainly don't want that happening. So I've made sure to put a quote date on here, and then the last step, generate the link. Now, this is the link you're going to send to your borrowers. And if you need some verbiage around what to say to your borrowers on this, I would highly encourage that you go to our scripts area. So let me close this real quick. And I'm going to click on help because I want to show you where these are at. When you first get in here, you'll see that our support center has some recommended links. These are the ones I'm talking about. MC scripts, this one will give you our borrower scripts, and you can see that these are just how to position yourself with the clients. They're actual scripts that you can use here. Realtor scripts to be able to coach your agents. And then there's core questions to ask realtors. And then a video review checklist. So if you haven't started in on videos yet, I would say check this out, but don't feel like you absolutely have to adhere to everything to it. Be natural, be yourself on the video, just try and explain the options, give a good call to action at the end, make sure and respect the referral partner. But outside of that, when you start getting more and more comfortable with this, you want to make sure to check this list periodically. Just make sure you're hitting on all these points, because the more you can deliver in terms of value on that video, the better it's going to be, especially since this is going to be a marketing presentation and this is going to get passed around. It's not just going to one person. It could be shared. It could start going viral for you. You post it on Facebook. People can share after share after share, and pretty soon you're reaching people that you did not think you were going to reach. And without a video that encompasses all these, your advice may get lost in the mix. So make sure to check these out. These are going to be very helpful for you. Now, there's a couple other things I do want to show you here, and that is there's sales training here. Now, this is a playlist that Dave Savage came up with, and it has some of the most pertinent videos he feels will really get you on the right track to be able to sell with Edge. This one is particularly important. This is a stumbling block for a lot of people. Is what do I say in the email to my client when I send out this link? Well, we've got several different versions. We've got what Tim Lamb does. We've got Jeremy Forcier's take on it, and we've got Josh Meadows' take on it. They're all in here. There's even additional videos, how to do an effective mortgage coach video with Bill Hart. Jeremy Forcier did his own, but these are all snippets. You can see they're fairly short. Some of them are 2 and 3 minutes. There's a couple of them that are about 20 minutes, and these are Dave Savage interviews with industry leaders. But certainly check these out. Run through the playlist when you get the chance. It's gold, and it's definitely going to help. Now, I mentioned Josh Meadows and Jeremy Forcier. Going from price to advice with Josh Meadows, this was a call we did a couple of months ago, actually, and we broke it down into little nuggets for you. And what this is Josh is a power producer. He's closing 30 loans a month, so he's doing really well with this. He's espoused Mortgage Coach Edge as his primary presentation platform, and he's made it a habit to do it with every single presentation, and he's found great success with it. And in this presentation, we actually we went through the entire process. Dave Savage interviewed him the entire time, and then we broke it up into little nuggets that you can use to understand what's working, what's successful out there, and what can you adopt that might be helpful in your practice. And then, of course, I won't go without saying you gotta be familiar with the knowledge base. If you run into something that you don't know how to do in Edge, the quickest way is to do a search here in the knowledge base. For instance, you want to learn how to read the total cost analysis because you're not sure what that short-term area means. There's one right here, how to read the TCA. But if I type in read TCA, it's going to bring up the results. So how do I read the TCA? How do I read the information? And then anything you search for will give you some results. So for instance, mortgage insurance, you can see I've got creating split MI, how do I show a single MI premium? And when you hit more, there's a lot of these, how to enter MI on an FHA loan. This is a very common question. Why is my MI not included in the pity payment? 10 to 1, there's an issue with one of your cutoffs. But certainly start here, do your searches in there. There's going to be video assets for just about everything. And then if you don't find what you're looking for, you can always ask your peers. You can suggest a new feature, or fill out a request form with support. And this is, it's pretty generic. Just put in your name. Now, since I'm logged in, it looks a little bit different. Let me log out of that, and I will submit a request. Now, you can always email us directly at support@mortgagecoach.com. It's going to go to the same place. But when you fill in a request form here, it gives you a couple more things that will help us identify what the problem is for you so we can get it solved faster. But when you put these in, you have the ability to attach a file. And this is pretty cool here. You can record a screencast of what's going on your computer. So if you're running into an issue that you cannot figure out and you need to be able to show us in video, this is the best way to do it. When you hit record screencast, it's actually going to open up a video recorder for you. And all you have to do is jump back over to Edge, hit record, and then start recording your screen and talking into your microphone. You can tell us exactly what's going on. We can even respond with a video for you. So make use of this if you get the chance. It's a very helpful tool. All right, so back over to Edge. That's enough of the support side there. And let's check out what our rent versus own presentation looks like. And actually, let's see. I think it's this one here. Yeah, there we go. And I'm going to regenerate that real quick because I think I closed the one I was working on. There we go. That's the right payment. So we explain what the differences are in the net monthly payments here. We know how does this relate to the pity payment. You can see we've got net monthly savings, and it shows us our purchase price across the board for each one of these, and then our cash to close for each one. Now, I'm sure you're noticing that I'm highlighting these fields. Now, how am I highlighting these fields? Anytime you're in a preview of the presentation, and you can tell you're in a preview because it'll have this clear all button down here. Anytime you're in a preview of a presentation, you can left click on any field in here and it will highlight for you. Now this goes along with what Diane was asking about earlier, is how do we use Edge Live? So we're going to demonstrate that real quick. I'm going to generate my link. I'm going to copy it. Now when I want to use Edge Live, I'm going to send this link out to my borrower. And let me create a secondary window here for you. Try and show you side by side what this is going to look like. All right, that's close enough. So the right side of my screen, this is my borrower. This is when they click my link, what they're going to see. So I'm going to paste in my link there and just hit enter. Now, obviously, this is a little bit, it's a little bit squeezed because I'm showing you two screens. I might be able to get it a little bit more even. There we go. Now, when your borrower has clicked the link and you've got them on the phone, that's the best time to use Edge Live. So get them on the phone. Hi, Mr. Borrower. I wanted to make sure that we could go over this presentation, answer any questions you have. It's the biggest decision of your life, so let's go through it in detail and make sure you understand everything. So borrower has clicked your presentation. This is what they see on their end. Now, when you're in Edge, you're going to go to this last screen of the presentation, and then you can hit preview right here. Now, if you've already generated your link and you're on the line with them, you can hit Edge Live. It does the exact same thing as the preview button. So I'll hit preview. Now, my side of the screen, I can adjust things. So I can clear everything out, and you can see it cleared on my borrower side as well. Now, when you're using Edge Live, you're using this to navigate the report with your borrower. So, a total cost analysis or a rent versus own, you're going to want to be able to take them line by line, maybe not that detailed, but you're going to want to take them through the steps that you think are the most important parts of this presentation. So when I start with my borrower, I'm going to start by explaining the top left section because this is the one that really does have the most detail in it. And it's not so much a comparative point at this point. It's really more about just showing all the ins and outs of each loan. So I would start with highlighting objects that I'm talking about. So for instance, Mr. Borrower, I wanted to explain, what's going on with FHA mortgages right now. Last month, the MI factors were substantially higher, and I've got 3 different options for you. I'm going to show you what FHA looked like last month. I'm going to show you what it looks like right now. And I'm going to show you how much more house you can afford by using today's factors. Now, you may have noticed that I clicked on each one of these columns about a half a second before I finished the sentence where I was talking about it. The reason is I've got the timing down. It'll take you a little while to get the timing down, but generally you can expect highlights to happen about a half a second to a second after you actually click them. So practice this just like I'm doing. Open up 2 screens here, paste in your link on the right side of the screen, do a preview on the left side of the screen so you can see exactly how fast it interacts between the two. Because remember, this is what your borrower is seeing. The borrower, if he clicks on anything, it's not going to change any of the highlighting. But you can click on anything you'd like and change the highlighting. So I'm going to go ahead and clear those out now, and I'm going to continue my conversation with the borrower. Now, Mr. Borrower, you told me that you're paying $22.15 for rent, right? So what I'm showing you are three different options that have comparable purchase or have comparable pity payments. Now, this first option over here is showing 2172.28. Now you can see that's a little bit less than what you're paying for rent, and that's FHA last month. That was at a 4.25 rate, and that netted you the 2172 payment. Now, if we look at what FHA is this month, it's got a lower MI factor and rates are a little bit lower. So you'll see that we've now got a 4% rate. And beyond that, your payment has now dropped to just over $2,000. Pretty significant reduction in payment. The reason I wanted to show you this third column is I want to show you how much more house you can afford for roughly the same thing you're paying for rent, actually just a little bit less than what you're paying for rent. Now, as we drill down here, you're going to see that there's principal paid lines below each one of these homeownership options. Now, the pity payment, when we take out the principal that you're paying, we come up with net payments down at the bottom line here. Now, these are the ones in gray that you're seeing highlighted right now. Now, the net payments, we just basically subtract out the principal that you've paid because you're retaining that in the form of equity. That's yours. That's part of your house now. So the net monthly payment is what we're really looking at. And if you check on the right side, you'll see that the graphics also reflect the net monthly payments. And as the originator here, I'm going to highlight the ones that I want to talk about. And you can see that as I do that, it'll bounce the graphic and it'll highlight the one I clicked on. Now, if you want to get more detailed into the payment streams, and this actually becomes important when you're talking about the declining MI. So at this point, you're on the education side. You're going to clear out all the highlighting, and then you're going to go in and click on payment stream. So Mr. Borrower, I wanted to show you FHA loans, they actually change MI every 12 months based on the average outstanding balance. And by the time you get to the end of this payment, you've reduced the MI down to a factor where you're only paying $14.58 at the end of the loan. And obviously you could go into the discussion about how most people aren't aware of that. They think that the mortgage insurance is going to be the same for the entire loan. That's simply not the case. And as we continue to look through these, if we're looking at FHA now, we can see that as we scroll down to the very bottom, we've got a $14.14 payment. And at that point, Edge Live won't scroll. So you might want to actually tell them to scroll down to the bottom so that they can see that. It will be highlighted for them, but it won't scroll for them. And I'll see if I can work on that and make that a little bit more fluid for you. But once you're done discussing that payment stream, my recommendation is spend some time in the More Info section at the top left. So when you pop out that More Info section, it's also going to pop out on the borrower's end. Now, this becomes really important for your conversation because remember, Mr. Borrower, I showed you that if you bought a house for $300,000 last month and I showed you what it looks like now, this new option, I'm showing you that you can actually afford a $320,000 house for roughly the same payment as you would have made last month. And then you can start breaking down the options. Here's the critical components. Last month, your FHA mortgage insurance would have been $323 for the first month. Now, $203 for that same price point. And if you wanted to get that $20,000 more house, you're still going to save money because your mortgage insurance is only $216. Now, once you're done talking about that, if you want to bounce the graphs, you can. At this point, I would actually advise the borrower to hover his mouse or her mouse over the specific graphic. And the reason is it pops up a little dialog box that tells them exactly how much of their payment is principal and interest, what their escrows are, their taxes and insurance, and it shows any investment or principal reduction payments that they might have made. So if you are recommending those, you can certainly you'll see it'll actually show them in purple for the investment. And it'll show the reduction as well. But I didn't put any reinvestments on here, so it's not going to show any of those. But you can see if I wanted to bounce the graphs, I could bounce it and it will highlight on the other end for me. Now, my next step here is I'm going to go into the closing costs and I'm going to say, Mr. Borrower, the whole point of this conversation was you could afford about $10,500 for your down payment. That's why we chose that $300,000 house. Now you can get a much lesser payment now with that same down payment, but it's still going to be a $300,000 house. But for just slightly more down payment, $700 more, we can get you into that $320,000 house at a savings compared to what you were going to pay last month. I might also show them, I'm not going to go through the minutia of the APR, non-APR costs, all this kind of stuff. It really doesn't matter to the borrower. They're looking at the bottom line. So I think I would highlight cash to close for each item. And I would say, Mr. Borrower, you can see the cash to close is roughly the same between each of these. So it's up to you. Do you want the $20,000 more house, or would you prefer to save the $170 a month on the mortgage insurance and just stay in the $300,000 house? Now, you can also pop out the fee detail, and I would encourage you to do this. And the reason is it'll pop out on their side, just like it's on yours. When you click on something, it'll automatically move the highlight over to that field for the borrower. So if you want to discuss, how much is your origination fees? Well, let me show you. It's right here on this line item. You can see there's a couple of other fees in here. There's some reserves. You might want to explain what reserves are at this point. Explain what the hazard insurance premium. But at the same time, these are static. Everybody's going to charge roughly the same amount for their costs. And you don't want a cost shopper. Instead, you want somebody who's going to value your education rather than just sitting there looking at, $10 difference in the cost. Now, this is also a great point to let your borrower know that these costs are estimates, and they may be slightly different at close depending on what their credit status is. If you haven't run credit for them yet, what they're actually going to qualify for. There's a number of factors that can certainly change these. Now, if you were going to show reinvestment strategy, you could certainly go in here. I might still show this even though I'm not reinvesting, because I want to show them how their net worth is compiled. And that's that explanation we did before where you're starting with 20 grand in the bank for any of these programs. And then you can see what our cash to close is going to be for each one. And for each item, that's going to leave you roughly $2,500 on the first two options, about $1,500 on the third option left in your bank account. That's going to continue to grow over time, and it's going to add to your net worth. Then I think I would transition into talking about what that net worth is. Now, I could certainly go into the monthly payment detail here, but I'm rehashing the same stuff again. If I go in here, you can see that it's just pretty much the same information as I was showing on the top left quadrant. So I think just for fluidity, when I'm talking about what their assets look like at the 15-year point, I would probably want to go down to this 15-year graph and explain what the net worth is. And I would tell them, Mr. Borrower, on the rent side, if you choose not to purchase, you will have $21,500 in the bank instead of the $20,000 you have right now. And that's just the accrued growth based on the 0.5% interest over 15 years. And I would also tell them, Mr. Borrower, if you hover your mouse over the rent column, you'll actually see what that figure is. Then I would drive them into the new options. Try hovering your mouse over that second bar. You're going to see your net worth is $277,000. Now, why is it so much higher on the homeownership option versus the rent option? Because the rent option, you don't have any equity. All you have is the money in the bank. On the homeownership option, you've converted that money into the bank into a down payment, and your payments going forward, roughly the same as what you were doing for rent, have accrued you a significant amount of equity. Probably $260,000 worth of equity here. And at that point, you could dive into the more info section to show them exactly what they've got. You can say that here on the rent side, you're going to pay $493,000. And then on the home ownership side, you'll pay significantly less for your total payments. Now, on each home ownership side, you're also paying a good amount of principal. Now, this is what's generating a lot of your equity. The other part of it is your home is appreciating. We used a 3% appreciation model here. So not only are you paying down the principal, but you're reaping the benefit of home appreciation over that 15-year period of time. And you can see what our values are. We've got the value here at 467 and 498 for the last one because it was a higher purchase property. And that's pretty significant. And then you subtract the loan balance, and that's going to give you your equity at each point. Then I would probably drive them into the rent versus principal paid over 60 months. And I might even just mention it to them because rent versus principal paid, they know that with rent, they're throwing it away. With principal, they're retaining. So this is a negative. These are all positives. So I might just drive their attention to hover their mouse over it just to see exactly how much principal they'd pay over the 5-year period of time versus how much rent they would pay over that 5-year period of time. Pretty significant difference there. You could certainly drive them into the more info sections and show them the total breakdown here. It's very similar to what we saw in the long-term section, so probably no need to rehash all of it, but you do want to make them aware that it's there. Now, when you're all done with this, you're going to hit clear all, and it will clear out all the highlighting for you, with the exception of this one that doesn't seem to want to clear for me. There we go. Now, one thing I will tell you about Edge Live is Edge Live is great for doing the interaction while you've got the person on the line. That's the most critical component of Edge Live. But one other factor when you're previewing a presentation is whatever state you leave this presentation in, when your borrower clicks on that link, it's going to open it up exactly how you left it. So for instance, if I wanted to make sure that my borrower saw the net worth options and saw the total equity as the primary thing, maybe even the real estate value as the primary thing, I would highlight and pop out what I wanted to have happen. Then I'm simply going to close this tab. I'm not going to close these guys here. I'm not going to unhighlight everything. I'm going to just close this tab. Now, I'm also going to create a new tab here and close that initial one. So remember, I was in Edge Live. I highlighted a couple of things and popped something out. Then I closed it. Now, what happens here is when your borrower goes to click on your link, it's going to pop out the way you left it. So they have to hit I understand on the disclosure, but check it out. It's still on that 15-year analysis point. It's showing the highlights I want. It's where I want the borrower to start. Now, this is particularly important for when you want to have a starting point in your video. You know, your main crux of the presentation, let's say it's the mortgage insurance, because it would be in this case. You know, I would go into my preview and I would close out of this box, clear out all the highlights. And if I really wanted to focus on the mortgage insurance, I'm going to pop out the more info section. And then I'm going to go to the payment breakdown and I'm going to highlight each one of these MIs. Then I'm going to go in and simply close out the presentation. When my borrower goes into it next time, it's automatically going to open to that section and it's going to have the highlights that I wanted already there. So they understand and it's set on that screen for you. Now your video, if you do have a video, will actually start playing in the background behind the screen. So the really cool part about this is if this is the starting point of what you're talking about in your video, you've now got them engaged and they're following along with you. So I would encourage you when you're doing your videos, make sure to give prompt points to your borrowers. You want to tell them, okay, I'd like you to click on the more info in that top left quadrant, then click on the closing costs. Then I'd like you to click on the fee details so you can see exactly what fees are incorporated. And the reason for this is you can't do a screen capture recording, so you can't, your mouse can't guide the video. But as long as you record your video in a way that prompts your borrower to go where you need them to go, they'll be able to navigate it successfully. And in fact, anybody they pass it along to would also be able to navigate it successfully based on your instructions. All right, so I know that was a lot to cover. I did record this. This will be in our coaching call archive. And let me show you where that's at real quick. Oops. There we go. So our coaching call archive, you can get there by clicking help. And then it's the top left one here, access our coaching call archive. And you can see that this shows all the Tuesday calls, Thursday calls, and then it has the most recent Edge beginners class. So if you're brand new to Edge, if some of what you saw today kind of made you cringe and you're like, oh, wow, I've never done any of this before, and you want to just do the basic, check out this presentation here. This is an hour-long call. And what it does is it walks you through creating your first FHA versus conventional presentation. Now you'll note that this is from last week. This is before the guideline change, so we might have the old MI factors in here. But it's a good practice session for you to be able to create your first presentation, get to a point where you've generated a link, and then certainly for your first one, send that over to us in support. So support@mortgagecoach.com. Shoot us your link along with, use some of the scripts that we've given you and treat us like you're the borrower. And what we'll do is we'll respond to you and let you know, what you did really well about the presentation, what could have been improved, and then we'll give you some next steps, almost like a homework assignment of what you would need to do to get this presentation to be a borrower-facing one that you could send out to anyone. And I would tell you that the Edge Beginners class stops just short of doing video. So the next step when we return it to you is going to be instructions on how to create a video around this specific presentation so that you can send that to us for review. And once you get 5 of these under your belt, they become so easy that it just becomes second nature. It's just like going into point and filling out the 1003. You do it a couple of times and you know where to go. You know where to navigate. You know what you don't have to do. And you know how to make it an effective presentation. But our Thursday training call will be here in the list. It'll be in the January list right at the bottom. So I'll have that up by the end of the day today. And these are all going to YouTube's. So if you're not able to watch YouTube on your company computer, you can actually watch it on your mobile device if you need to. You can pull up our page on the mobile device, and that's just mortgagecoach.zendesk.com. And let me give you that. Actually, I'll give you the whole link. So you can pop open the coaching call archive on your mobile device if you need to. I just put that in the chat box for you. But you can actually watch these on your mobile. So if you do have YouTube restrictions at work and you're not able to watch them, try doing it on the mobile. It may be a little small, but it'll certainly give you the right idea, and you'll be able to follow along with the videos. So with that said, it is 10:01, so I am going to call it for today. If you have any questions regarding this presentation, or if you'd like to learn a little bit more, I do see your question there, Cynthia, about you wanted a demo on the product. I will certainly get that over to our training team and have somebody reach out. But beyond that, if any of you have any questions, if you have calculation issues you're running into, always first step, start with support. We are an email-based support system, but I've got a team of people that are just chomping at the bit to get at your requests. So we'll get those solved as fast as possible for you. The team is able to look at the background of your presentation to determine any errors that are going on, and they're the best ones equipped to answer the really detailed technical questions. So if you do have any of those, support at mortgagecoach.com. We're here to help from 7:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. Pacific time. If you do log a request in the off hours, we will